The Legal Eagle Review is sponsored by the North Carolina Central University School of Law and the Virtual Justice Project. Well, Irving Joyner, how are you doing today?
Great today. Great to be here at the reopening of the Legal Eagle Review.
The reopening. So how long has it been since this show was on the air?
Well, you know, we started this thing, I think it was back in 1998. That's before a lot of people were born. And we went for about 10 years before we had to take a break. And we started it because of the need for people to know about the law and how the law impacted them, particularly in minority communities, in communities around the programming area that we're dealing with here. And it was well received, and it was a program that I really enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I remember when I started at the law school, at Central's Law School, and heard about your radio show, and I got a chance to listen to it, was very impressed, and then I was very fortunate that you invited me to be a guest on your show a couple of times. So I have always been a fan of the show and am just incredibly excited about being a part of this show now. Can you tell our listeners what gave you the idea of starting a radio program? Because serving the community, there are a number of ways in which you can serve the community, but you came up with the wonderful idea of communicating via radio. How did that idea come about?
Well, actually, prior to the Legal Eagle Review, I was working with the station on a program called Like It Is. Beverly Mahone was the host and asked me to join as a co-host for a while. And then as we talked through a lot of the issues in Like It Is, constantly legal issues kept surfacing that we needed to discuss. And then the idea came that we needed to wed this more to the law school and what it was that we were doing at the law school, and then to pick up and identify particular needs within the community that needed to be addressed at the time. And I think that probably one of the leading issues at that time was police misconduct, police community relations, and probably the same thing that is the number one topic in our community today. So we were able to bring in some people to promote that idea. The station here enjoyed the connection with the law school. It was something that the community bought into pretty quickly, and we were just on a roll from there.
Wow, you know, I was going to ask you about some of the topics that you covered when the radio show was started, and you know, it's a little sad to hear that the whole issue of policing in our communities was an issue then, which is of course no surprise, but what's so sad is it continues to be an issue today. What were some of the other issues that the show touched upon?
Well, in addition to the police community relations discussions, obviously we talked about political issues, the right to vote, the right to register, and what the specific requirements were for people to register. We gave directions to people on getting to the polls and getting people out to vote. We talked about domestic violence issues. We talked about bankruptcy. Many people had financial problems, kind of like they do today, and we're looking for a way out. How do you deal with all of this debt? And so at the time we brought in some people to talk about bankruptcy. We talked about marriage because a lot of people who were in love or thought they were tried to find a way to the altar, but without knowing the legal consequences of them taking that stroll. They spend $20,000 to get married, and then once they got married, they didn't understand the business side of the marriage. They only understood the love portion of the marriage, which usually ended after the honeymoon. So we talked about that. We talked about divorce and separation. Contracts, so it was a wide open level of discussions that we had about many different issues that touched and concerned our community.
Yeah, so it sounds like, the issues that the show brought to light and touched upon are going to be the same issues that we talk about with the revival of this show, the renewing of this show. How do you feel about the show coming back? It's been off the air for about 8 years, I think.
Yeah.
How do you feel about? Well, let me ask you this question first. You've got so many hats that you wear, and you inspire me in so many ways. When I think that I'm tapped in terms of energies that I have available to do things that are really important, you're one of the people that I think about, because I say, Irv is doing so many things. I can dig down just a little bit deeper and come up with the energy to do this other important task. So let's first start with, tell us what it is that you have on your plate. You are a law professor at the law school. What else do you have going on?
Well, I serve as the legal chair of the North Carolina NAACP, and in that role, I'm inundated with issues and complaints and concerns from people all over the state, because we have chapters all over the state. I work with litigation. I'm involved in the redistricting cases dealing with the state legislature and our congressional districts. I'm dealing with the voter suppression litigation, and all of those cases are presently alive and functioning either at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals or at the United States Supreme Court. And so that involves a lot of interviewing, preparation of witnesses for trial, preparation of briefs that will have to be, that have been filed in the cases, and then preparation for arguments before the various courts. I deal with my church, where I am legal counsel for them, and helping them to work through particular issues and concerns. And I also do the same thing with other churches around who have heard about what I do at my church, and they want to copy that in some kind of way. And then I teach, which is probably the most important thing that I do. I do 2 courses each semester, and it is an outstanding experience for me as I talk about race in the law, which is always a timely topic, and civil rights, which is never too old or too dated to talk about. And so I appreciate the accolades but you're my inspiration.
So you just named about 3 or 4 full-time jobs that you have, and so now you're taking on again the revival of this radio show. The time that the show had to be I don't know how you say it. Suspended. Thank you. Yes. I understand it was because you had so many things that were on your plate. So you are actively involved with the revival of the show. How are you able to fit this in with all of the other responsibilities that you have?
We'll see just how much work you put in, and that will decide about how much I'm going to have to put into it. But, this is a labor of love. Over the years, we were able to bring in outstanding guests, people who were actively involved in so many areas of our life, people doing so many different things that had an impact on our community, and people didn't know about it, and people didn't know about the many different aspects of the law and how the law touches their lives, and you wouldn't even think about it as you go about your daily activities. So this show was an opportunity to educate them about the broad brush of the law and then some of the consequences for violating those legal provisions, which meant that you had to know what those legal provisions were in order to avoid those penalties that might attach. So this is a labor of love, just informing the community, which is no different than what I do in the classroom every day.
Mm-hmm. And I know the show was missed when it was off the air, when it was suspended, and because I know you've had folks who have come up to you asking you about the show. I've had folks coming up to me asking me about the show. So I agree with you. Even when your plate may seem full, if there's something that's really important that will have an impact on the community, sometimes you just have to dig down a little bit deeper and come up with that energy to do it. So I'm incredibly excited about. Being a part of this revival.
Well, why are you excited about this? I mean, I'm excited that you're excited, so why are you excited?
Well, I think it was, I was excited about the show when I first learned about it, and when I would listen to you at the time, it was on Saturday mornings, and I remember taking my kids to the soccer field, and like between their games, or if it was doing practice, I would be in the car listening to your show, and it was such wonderful content. It was such needed content, and so I was excited about the fact that this show even existed, and I was saddened when it had to be suspended, for lack of a better word. And it has felt like there's been a void, because there's so much that continues to go on in our communities. And so when it was mentioned again, I remember going to you, asking you what you felt or how you felt about the show being revived. And you were, 100% on board, and were very welcoming of me being a part of it. So, anything that serves to help educate and empower our community, I am 100% on board. So there's just simply a need. You can never have too much information, I think. And I think this show has always served as a vehicle to communicate in a different way to maybe a different group of folks. And folks who may consume content and information from a whole host of avenues. So I'm incredibly excited, and I feel privileged to be sharing the mic with you.
Okay, well, my specialty over the years has been criminal law, civil rights, and when I started practicing law, that's what I did. Your area of specialty is constitutional law. That's that brainy stuff. But how do you see constitutional law fitting into some of our ongoing discussions that we need to have on this program?
Oh my goodness! It when we talk about civil rights, when we talk about our criminal justice system, when we talk about voting rights, all of those areas begin with the Constitution of the United States. And it is an incredibly comprehensive area. I just absolutely love constitutional law. I teach constitutional law at the law school. I also teach a Supreme Court seminar. And those are two of my favorite courses, because there's so much information and the need for understanding about our Constitution. So when we think about, you had mentioned that you are doing work with the NAACP on the redistricting, and that this is a case that has gone before the Fourth Circuit. There are issues that are being presented to the United States Supreme Court. Well, issues of redistricting, as you know, begin with the Constitution. When we look at voting rights and ability to vote beyond redistricting, that all begins with the Constitution. When we think about our criminal justice system, when we think about the policing of our community, that begins with the Constitution, with the Fourth Amendment, with the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment. And when we think about employment, so one of the areas that I practiced in was employment law. And so we think about discrimination. again, you got to go back to the Constitution. So it's such a broad and important document and law for our society that it marries perfectly with what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this show.
Well, you know, I also have found over the years that people in our communities know very little about constitutional law, how our government is set up and what it is designed to do. They know very little about employment law. There is the assumption that many people make that if I have a job for life. Mm-hmm. And no matter what happens, they are going to keep me there because I'm the best employee that they have ever had. And then they run into problems. And these problems oftentimes result in their terminations. And so I really see this as a forum to help people better understand their legal status so that they can better control their behavior, so they don't run afoul of those things that might adversely impact them. So I'm excited that you're bringing to this show that kind of expertise, and it is an expertise that our community will need.
Absolutely. And you know, oftentimes people don't know what they don't know.
Oh my goodness! You know? Well, you know, there's an old African proverb that says that if you people do what they know, when people don't know what they're doing, then they do what they know, mm-hmm. and typically what they know is the wrong thing to do. So I'm excited again that you're excited, and I hope that our audience will pick up this program and with the same enthusiasm that we're able to demonstrate here.
I am sure they will. Why don't we take a quick break here, and then we will come back and we can talk a little bit about the types of guests that we hope to have on the show and the types of topics we hope to cover to educate our listeners. So thank you again for listening to the Legal Eagle Review. We will be right back in a few minutes.
We're at WNCU 90.7 FM, your jazz-themed station. And the Legal Eagle Review is a revival of what we started some years ago. And I'm Irv Joyner here with my co-host, April Dawson. And we're trying to help you to see where we're going with this show. So, April, what do you envision as some of the topics that we will be dealing with out of the chute on the Legal Eagle Review?
Well, you know, Irv, I think one of the areas that is of such pressing concern to our community right now, our state, our nation, is the policing of our communities. And
amen.
We've got to have some discussions about that. People are concerned about how folks are being policed. People are concerned about what their rights are. So we kind of go back to this show being a vehicle to educate the community. A lot of folks don't know what their rights are when they're being stopped by the police. So what their rights are when they've been arrested, when they're protesting. So these are areas. So this is one very important area that I think we're going to cover pretty early on in this show.
And a lot of police don't understand what the rights are that they are supposed to be protecting, mm-hmm. and the interests that they are supposed to be serving.
Right.
You know, so that's. I mean, I know that's going to be hot,
yes.
And we'll bring in, I'm sure, some people who are on the practice side, as well as some people on the theoretical and activist side. Dealing with that issue.
And also some folks from law enforcement as well, because we want to make sure that this is a collective conversation, that it's not, one-sided. We want to make sure we get a number of views from different perspectives, and that all parties are represented. So, yeah, that's going to be a very interesting discussion.
Oh, can't wait.
Mm-hmm. So what about you? What's a topic that you hope we cover, or that you plan on covering in the show?
Well, obviously we're going to have to talk about politics,
mm-hmm.
and the right to vote, and the need for people to vote, and the many laws that exist that are designed to minimize the opportunity and enthusiasm for people to vote. We are now into the active campaign season. The Democratic Party has completed its convention. The Republican Party has completed its convention, and now they're in full combat.
Yes.
Over who will vote to become president. And then, there are a number of more important offices down the ballot, as to who the congressional representatives will be, who the U.S. senators will be, who will be in the state legislature, who the judges will be. Here in North Carolina, for instance, we have a very important race for the Supreme Court vacancy that exists. And then there are local judgeships and members of the Board of Education and City Council and all of those things. And people need to understand the importance of having the right people in place so that their rights, their desires, their interests are protected, and that they receive the full panoply of benefits that this country is supposed to extend to them.
Yes, absolutely. And, when we think about the importance of voting, something that's coming that we can see on the horizon is, the 2020 census, right? And with that census comes the redrawing of the legislative districts. And it's really important that people understand the importance of voting today, the next election, because that's going to dictate who is going to draw the lines in the future.
Right, which was a big problem in 2010.
Exactly.
When people were excited in 2008 about the election of Barack Obama, and then when 2010 came along, that excitement had waned.
Exactly.
And as a result of that, there was a big change in the configuration in the legislative bodies, and that created some of these redistricting problems that we had. Another issue that I think is important is poverty. And some of the legal implications of poverty, particularly as it relates to our criminal justice system.
Yes.
People who go to court for relatively minor offenses, driving under the influence or speeding. And then they are taxed with all of these heavy fines and fees in order to stay out of jail. And then because of their poverty, they're unable to pay, which puts them in a position that they might end up going to prison anyway, or reoffending in some other way. And that's an issue that I think we will be addressing somewhat in the future. But you talked about employment discrimination and just employment rights, period, not just discrimination. How does that play out in some of our discussions?
Oh, it plays out, and it actually, one's level of economic, that one's economic level can have an impact, because you talk about poverty, that can play a role in employment. So you have individuals who are at a particular socioeconomic level, and if they do happen to lose their job, that could have devastating effects on them, right?
That's bad. One paycheck away from welfare.
One paycheck away. And then what flows from that, issues with respect to health, right? And so do you have health insurance? Are you no longer able to continue having health insurance? And then when we think about poverty as it relates to children, right? And when we think about nutrition and when we think about education, where a certain segment of our population, based on their economic status, will determine what type of quality education they receive or don't receive. So these issues are so incredibly interrelated, and we'll be taking them in chunks, but we need to always understand that the state of our city, of our state, of our nation, all of these things are interrelated. So, and we'll be tackling so many of them.
Well, you mentioned education. And I think in North Carolina, that is a big issue with the legislature having created these opportunity scholarship or vouchers in which they are now giving money to low-income people for the purpose of going to private schools.
And the charter schools.
And the charter schools, and then draining that money from the public education program. And these private schools are being largely an area of resegregation because mostly whites are there, or the more intelligent people of color that are brought there. And you then leave a public education system that is now made up mainly of poor people. That's receiving an inadequate and inferior education, not because they can't learn, but because of their poverty and their inability to match what is available in these private schools. And that insufficiency of funds results directly from the state now putting this money into these private institutions. We need to talk about that.
Absolutely, and you know that brings a point on, you know, the talent, and you know, we know that there are wonderfully bright students in all socioeconomic statuses, right? And because an individual may be born into poverty, a child may be born into poverty, that child doesn't have an opportunity to fulfill their full potential. So there is a whole segment of talent that is being ignored, that is not being nurtured, and that cannot be good. That is, in fact, abysmal in terms of what we are doing for the children. And our country, our city, our communities, our country, our state cannot survive if we ignore this very real talent pool, but ignore them because they happen to be born in poverty.
Or a suppression of this talent, a denial of opportunities, which kind of works out to this school-to-prison pipeline, where young people now, and I think that you are aware of this, have minor infractions in the school system, now bringing in school resource officers who are police officers, and now criminalizing minor violations of school rules, which will result in people going into court rather than that issue being resolved in the principal's office, increasing the prison population mainly of African Americans and Latinos, and typically that's males. And you know, I think that is an issue that you know, we certainly will be needing to explore.
Yes, and you know, one of the other programs that we'll be talking about is HBCUs, and how HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities, are serving the communities, particularly of color, right? And because we talk about this talent pool that may be underappreciated, and HBCUs play an incredible role, which is one of the reasons why I am just so proud and privileged to work for North Carolina Central University School of Law. I am actually a product of 2 HBCUs, a very proud product.
All right.
I went to Bennett College undergrad, received my
Bennett
Bell, white gloves, hats, and
you don't wear the hats anymore.
No, we do not. No, we do not. And truth be told, when I was in school, we pushed back on that a little bit. But now that I'm a little older, I appreciate the thought of, you know, dressing, you know, like a lady. You know, I think that was perfectly fine.
Well, that's something new to a lot of young people in our community.
No white hats and white gloves, and I also graduated from Howard University School of Law. So, I have much love in my heart for HBCUs, as I know you do as well, even though you did not receive your undergraduate or law degree from an HBCU. You are giving of your time and energy.
Okay, you want to dog me now, right?
No, it's all good, you know. And so I'm excited about talking with the dean of the law school, Phyllis Craig Taylor, who has been appointed to the HBCU task force. Yes. And so she's going to be able to talk with us about the Obama administration's view of the role that HBCUs play in helping to better serve our community.
Yeah, and here in North Carolina, efforts by the General Assembly to downgrade the HBCUs in the university system. We have the issue dealing with Elizabeth City State, which is now part of a special project that allows students to go for $500 per semester tuition, which is not bad by itself, but have to look at the overall impact that reduction, that significant reduction in resources is going to have on their ability to fulfill their mission and to provide a quality education to the students there. And then the underfunding of the HBCUs by our General Assembly and the General Administration. And so that's just a wide area that we need to discuss, but long live HBCUs.
Long live them. You know, Irv, we both participated in an environmental law symposium in the spring, this past spring, and I remember you talked about environmental justice, and there was some efforts in North Carolina to deal with environmental waste and how that dealing of environmental waste affected communities of color. So I'm really excited about having folks on who can help us understand how environmental issues are also social justice issues.
Yeah, and they really impact our communities. We look at Walnut Cove in Stokes County, for instance, or Goldsboro down in Wayne County, where there is this coal ash deposit that's been placed into the ground, seeping into the groundwater, and then that runs off into the rivers and tributaries and end up in the drinking water in our local communities, and that is very dangerous, cancer-causing ingredients there. And we look at Walnut Cove, for instance, where there was a significant increase in the number of people who died from cancer or who contracted cancer in those communities, and they never could understand why until they began to look at some of the environmental deficiencies that existed or was caused by these coal ash deposits that ran off into the water.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that, when we think about the environment and we think about where we live in terms of the air we breathe, the water we drink, right? So we know in terms of Flint, Michigan, and the water issues there, we sometimes forget that we've got to be mindful of issues that may not initially seem as though they affect our community, but they do affect our community, and oftentimes in a disproportionate way than they affect other communities that may be more prosperous economically.
Well, it seems as if that disproportionality in terms of African Americans and Latinos is something that impacts us across the board, not only with the environment, bad water, bad air, and all of the other things that go along with that, and that produces health problems. That produces problems in schools for children who have excess lead consumption in their systems, which serves as a barrier to them being able to go to school and to learn, to prepare themselves for a better life. So there are just so many topics that we are going to have to raise here.
Definitely. And with this presidential election that we've got going on, right? So it's going to be, we're going to have to follow what's going on in the polls, what's going on with the candidates. And come November, we are going to have a new president, notwithstanding the fact that many of us would like for President Obama to serve another term. Unfortunately, the Constitution of the United States, we talk about the Constitution, forbids him from doing that, right? So it's the presidents are limited to 2 terms. But When he was visiting Canada, folks may remember the Canadians saying 4 more years. When he spoke at the Democratic Convention, which is now concluded, people may remember that there were folks in the audience saying 4 more years as he was speaking. But we're going to have a new president, which means that we're going to have policies that are going to affect our country, and we're going to have conversations about that. What's the impact that this new president is going to have on issues affecting our city, our state, and the nation as a whole? We think about the Supreme Court, right? The new president.
Big issue.
Big issue. And sometimes folks don't realize how significant a president's power is to appoint a justice on the United States Supreme Court, because the justices will serve significantly longer than the president will serve in office.
And will have a bigger impact on the daily lives of people than anything that the president can do. When we look at voting and the rights of people in dealing with Fourth Amendment and stop and seizures and arrests and the right to counsel and things like that, they have the final say on what our rights are. And if you don't have the right people there, then you're going to get some very negative results. And we have been receiving a lot of negative results from the Supreme Court. But it's a 4-4 split right now, and the next president is going to choose the tiebreaker, and that is going to be a critical appointment that they make.
Absolutely. And we have 3 justices who are over the age of 70. So there's a strong likelihood that that next president will not only select the justice who will fill Justice Scalia's seat, but will also appoint 3 more justices. So
I thought that the Supreme Court justices lived forever.
Well, sometimes their legacies live forever, right? So we'll talk about maybe Chief Justice Warren, and it was his court that issued the Brown v. Board of Education decision, and we'll have discussions about that, about the impact of that decision on our country today.
And we're going to have to talk about the impact of Scalia, who died on the Supreme Court to produce this 4-4 split.
Yes.
So these are just great topics
yes.
that we're going to have to address. And then for people out there in the audience, let us know if there are some things that we have not discussed that you want us to discuss, and we will certainly look at those and bring in people to talk about them, and may even bring you in to talk about it.
Now, we've been talking about all of these issues, and they all center around education. So there's the Virtual Justice Project, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. And that is a project that is designed to inform students, members of the community, about issues, legal issues, and that they need to know. So we'll have an opportunity to talk in our next segment about the Virtual Justice Project.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that.